Welcome everyone here in a traditional way by inviting our ancestors to be with us. We've been here thousands of years. I think that just because another law came into this country, that shouldn't stop us from having a say, because we know all about this country.
For decades, Uncle Moogie Sumner has been acting as a cultural ambassador for the Ngarrindjeri and Kaurna people of South Australia. Ahead of a referendum on a voice to federal parliament, Moogie's home state has become the first to give Indigenous people the ability to speak directly to parliament.
It will empower everyone, because everyone will be getting that advice from that voice.
I'm very conscious of the responsibility that this government has to get it right, not just for the sake of the state, but also for the sake of the voice nationally.
Labor Premier Peter Malinauskas pledged to introduce an Indigenous voice in 2019 when in opposition. It will allow locally elected Indigenous representatives to comment on any piece of legislation, as well as engage with all levels of government, including Cabinet.
Under the legislation, it is required that there be at least 2 meetings every year between the state First Nations voice and the South Australian Cabinet. And that's really designed so it's not just having a voice at the end of the process, once legislation hits Parliament, but at the start of the process where decisions are made that then shape legislation or shape programs or services.
There's no plan of attack, if you like, at the outset.
But the state Liberal opposition says the voice model has been poorly designed and appears tokenistic.
This is a body that's not to meet more than 4 times a year or up to 6. There is a real risk that a defective model, an ineffective model of engagement to the Parliament runs the risk of being worse than no model at all.
The opposition wants local Indigenous representatives to speak to Parliament through a committee.
We went out and conducted the most thorough consultation any SA government's had with Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities, and overwhelmingly, what was desired was a voice to the Parliament, not a voice to a committee. The South Australian model has other critics who say the voice should represent native title areas rather than 6 zones proposed by the government.
In South Australia at the moment we have 24 native title claims that have been determined either by consent determination or through litigation. They are the ones that are impacted by government policy the most. They are the ones impacted by mining and other activities on their country, water access on their country, Aboriginal Heritage Act on their country.
And it's something that we considered. What that would have meant, though, is if you weren't a native title holder, you wouldn't have had an ability to be part of this model. So if you were an Aboriginal person from another state who now calls South Australia home, if you're a member of the stolen generations who hadn't found your way home yet, you wouldn't have been able to be part of this model.
In my engagements, there was overwhelming feedback that it is about time. This isn't the silver bullet for First Nation communities issues. This is a mechanism where we can redesign the way that our voices are heard in Parliament.
This is a real opportunity to take up the generous invitation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Unlike the proposed federal voice, South Australia's doesn't require a referendum. Both will advise executive government and Parliament.
There is a very real prospect that a model like South Australia, the first of its kind anywhere in this nation, will be able to feed into a federal voice. There's nothing to fear and everything to gain from this in the lead up to a referendum later this year.
But neither the state or proposed federal voice will have veto powers.
If members of Parliament choose to dismiss that direct feedback from our communities, let them face the public.
First Nations voice will now be heard in the state of South Australia. I commend this bill to the House.
Yesterday on Kaurna land, the bill for a South Australian voice passed a special sitting of State Parliament without the support of the Liberal opposition.
Those of the opinion say aye. Aye. Against no.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The ayes have it.
It is something that is a great source of pride for us as a South Australian government because we are leading the nation.
Elections for the South Australian Voice representatives will be held later this year. Moogie Sumner says he will nominate and hopes many other Indigenous South Australians do too.
We're not going to come in there and say, OK, move out of the way, it's our turn. No, we have to work together. And that's how it should have been in the first place.